Hello, my name is Daniel Goll. I'm a researcher at the Sealand Convergence Institute. Today I will talk about the critical role of phosphorus in land management. I'm a trained biologist and I have a PhD in geoscience from the University of Hamburg in Germany. I have been working on various aspects governing the coupling of phosphorus and carbon cycling on land, and how this coupling affects the feedbacks between land and atmosphere and the functioning of ecosystems. In the year 2020, I joined the Sealand Institute to explore nature-based solutions for sustainable land management. In today's talk, I want to give the answers to the following three questions. What is the importance of phosphorus for the functioning of the biosphere? What are the problems associated with the phosphorus use by humans? And how can phosphorus be used more sustainably in the future? Part 1. Phosphorus essential for life. Phosphorus is essential for all living organisms on Earth. However, where phosphorus originates from has been a long-standing mystery. In 2020, researchers were able to put together a picture of the origin of phosphorus. The ALMA observatory was able to take a snapshot of the birth of a galaxy and also of the generation of phosphorus-bearing molecules. In addition, the Rosetta mission was able to trace down a phosphorus-bearing molecule on a meteorite, and thereby also identifying the means by which this phosphate could have been transported to the Earth. Phosphorus is essential for all life because it serves critical function on a cellular level. It is part of the sugar phosphate backbone which makes up DNA and RNA, which is the main information carrier of cells. It further is a critical component of phospholipids, which are the molecules which form the cellular walls and membranes. And third, phosphorus is a component of the adeno-3-phosphate system by which cells transport energy. And this critical importance of phosphorus for the functioning of cell also indicates as implications for the functioning of organisms. Here an example of a field in which part of the field has been added with phosphorus on the right hand side and part of the field has not received any additional phosphorus input. And you can see that the plant growth in the same point of time has been stimulated by the addition of phosphorus. This is because phosphorus is essential for the functioning of organisms on the one hand, and on the other hand, phosphorus is often in scarce supply. This might be related to its extraterrestrial origin. In a study by Hu et al. From 2020, they were able to show that phosphorus is lacking in a wide range of ecosystems. Here you can see a map by which each red dot indicates a system which responded positively to the addition of phosphorus. The widespread occurrence of phosphorus limitation of plant growth has implications for the functioning of the whole Earth system. As you know, vegetation is exchanging greenhouse gases with the atmosphere. On the one hand, plants are fixing CO2 from the atmosphere and storing it in biomass in a process called photosynthesis. On the other hand, CO2 is released back to the atmosphere in the process of respiration. The increasing atmospheric CO2 concentration is believed to stimulate plant growth worldwide, leading to a net uptake of CO2 from the atmosphere, thereby dampening man-made climate change. However, the widespread occurrence of phosphorus limitation is likely reducing the stimulation of plant growth by elevated CO2. There is a set of experiments performed worldwide in which part of ecosystems are fumigated by CO2 within large installations of rings with pipes in which CO2 is released within the rings, and then the response of the system is derived by comparing for example, plant growth within the rings compared to outside the rings where ambient CO2 concentrations are present. In a modeling experiment done for one of these sites, we found that models which do not account for the negative effect of phosphorus on plant growth largely overestimate the biomass increase due to the elevated CO2 concentration. This can be seen by the difference of the biomass response of the carbon-only models in gray compared to the models which include carbon, nitrogen and phosphorus in green. Due to this dampened response of vegetation to elevated CO2, also the overall land carbon uptake is reduced. This has been shown in work by myself from 2012, in which we compared the carbon uptake of land under increasing CO2 concentrations in simulations where we assume a realistic phosphorus availability and a simulation in which we assume there's unlimited phosphorus availability. And we find a large difference in the projected land carbon uptake for the 21st centuries between two simulations, where the uptake was reduced substantially in the simulation where we assume a realistic phosphorus availability. And this amount is large compared to the annual CO2 emissions by human activities. This has quite some implications because most of current generation of carbon cycle models do not account for phosphorus limitation of land carbon uptake, and therefore these models are likely overestimating the potential of land to dampen man-made climate change by assimilating carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. To summarize the first part, phosphorus is an essential element for all life forms on Earth. Naturally, it only occurs in small amounts and is often limiting the functioning of ecosystems. This has implications not only for food productions, but also for climate change and climate change mitigation. Part 2. Phosphorus use. The use of phosphorus by man has been associated to many different problems throughout the history. Because of that, phosphorus is also referred to as the devil's element. To give you a most recent example, in Florida, the leakage from a phosphate mining pond is threatening households in the area. Millions of gallons of toxic wastewater is threatening to flood the households in the area. To avoid the flooding, the wastewater is being pumped in the bay in the city. However, this wastewater is containing not only radioactivity but also high loads of phosphorus. And the bay in the region is naturally very short in phosphorus supply. Therefore, the addition of phosphorus is very likely to cause a so-called red tide, which is a bloom of bacteria which consume the oxygen in the seawater and also release toxins. Thereby, they produce a so-called dead zone in where all higher life forms get extinct. However, there have been many different other sorts of problems due to the use of phosphorus. Phosphorus was first discovered by alchemists in the 17th century looking for the so-called philosopher's stone, a mythical tool which is able to convert any material into gold. The first applications of phosphorus was the use as a food additive and later also to produce matches. However, because phosphorus is very reactive, the consumption is a very bad idea, and also the matches spontaneously combusted, leading to the death and burning of several people. The frosty jaw is one of the most prominent symptoms of the consumption or inhalation of phosphorus from workers in match factories. It describes the necrosis of the lower jaw. Later in the 19th century, the discovery of guano as a fertilizer led to the exploitation of the guano reservoirs in islands and also triggered wars in the area. Later, phosphorus was also used in form of bombs or nerve toxins in the First World War and also later on. And the most widespread problems today is the eutrophication of land, aquatic and marine systems. Today, most of the phosphorus is used in form of fertilizers. Only 10% is used for different other purposes. Throughout the history, different sources of phosphorus were being exploited. The alchemists discovered phosphorus in urine, but later bones were found to be a much better source of phosphorus. The discovery of the islands piled up with excrements of seabirds high in phosphorus triggered the exploitation of these islands and a boom of the production of phosphorus, first phosphorus fertilizers from guano. Later in the 20th century, rocks became the primary source of phosphorus for human consumption. Phosphorus-containing rocks are the primary resource of phosphorus for food production and economies. The known reserves are concentrated in a few countries, with Morocco having the largest share of the known reserves. Regions like Europe or Central Africa have no substantial resources themselves and rely on the import of phosphorus from other regions to fuel their food production. This has implications for food security in these regions and on a global scale. An example is the Arabic Spring, which has concerned the countries in the northern part of Africa, which are primary producers of phosphate. Because of this uneven distribution and the importance of phosphorus for food productions, phosphate prices have varied drastically in time. Here you can see the phosphate price index starting from the end of the 19th century to present day. And you can see several price spikes. One was triggered by the First World War, and the most recent one were triggered by the financial crisis and the subsequent political programs, and by the Arabian Spring. In addition to the uneven distribution of phosphorus reserves, these reserves are limited, and we likely see a peak in global phosphate rock productions within a few hundred years. This is because the exploitation rate is so high compared to the remaining reserves. To what extent the phosphorus reserves will be able to sustain demand in the future is a matter of debate, but it's clear that these reserves are endless and we will exploit them within a few centuries. Because of this, phosphorus fertilizer is rather expensive, and its application rate is often more dependent on the economic strength of farmers or regions than the actual requirements of phosphorus of the crops and soil systems. Here you can see a map of phosphorus fertilizer application, and you see that the rates span about one order of magnitude, with richer countries applying more phosphorus than poorer countries. We investigated to what extent these application rates are actually needed or not enough to grow crops. In this map you can see regions in blue in which more phosphorus was applied by farmers than was actually needed by their crop, which is a problem because the surplus of P is entering aquatic systems and can there cause eutrophication, and on the other hand it also is a cost which could have been avoided. Other regions here in the reddish colors, they apply not enough phosphorus for the crops to grow, meaning that the crops in these regions, they are limited in their growth by the availability of phosphorus and cannot make use of the full potential given by other plant resources like light, water or CO2. There is an increasing demand for phosphorus fertilizer not only in the agricultural sector but also in the sector of fish production. In a recent study I contributed to, we found that the production of fish, which is increasingly now done by aquaculture, leads also to an increasing demand of phosphorus fertilizer to grow algae to feed the fish or phosphorus for fish food. And in around the year 2005, we're now spending more phosphorus as input to the fish sector than we harvest in form of fish. Anthropogenic inputs of phosphorus to the biosphere, in particular the application of phosphorus to agriculture and the subsequent leaching of phosphorus to aquatic and marine systems where the trigger eutrophication is threatening the function of the Earth system as a whole. This is here illustrated using the concepts of planetary boundaries. This defines a safe space in which human alterations are not threatening the functioning or the stability of the Earth systems for various aspects like climate change, stratospheric ozone depletion, or freshwater use. The safe zone is here indicated in green, and there are two zones of increasing risks defined as the zone where there are likely risks in yellow and a zone in red where there's beyond any doubt high risks which can threaten the stability of the Earth system. And this was identified for three aspects. On the one, it's the loss of biodiversity and the use of nitrogen and phosphorus, which triggers eutrophication in many ecosystems. To summarize the second part, phosphorus is a critical raw element. It has a high risk supply. It has a high economic importance, and reliable and unhindered access is crucial for food production and overall political security. The major challenges are limited access to reserves, the increasing demand for phosphorus fertilizer, and the increasing negative environmental impacts which started to threatening the functioning of the Earth system as a whole. Part 3. Sustainable phosphorus use. You might have seen one of the articles in 2018 which reported about a new kind of public toilet which has been set up at spots in Paris. Or you even might have used one of them and thereby contributed towards a more sustainable use of phosphorus while enjoying the nice scenery. The concept behind these toilets is a small version of the concept which have been developed for sustainable use of the planet's limited resources. As we've learned in the previous part, urine is a source of phosphorus. The toilet collects the urine in a box of straw, which is then fully soaked, decomposed to produce nutrient-rich soil substrate. This soil substrate is then being used to grow some nice flowers on top of the toilet to make recycling of phosphorus even more enjoyable. This idea goes in the direction of a circular economy, in which a resource is recycled within a closed system by avoiding waste and other losses. In this example, one would have to produce some edible plants on top of the toilet to actually close the loop. A circular economy is of particular importance for resources in limited supply which are critical for the functioning of the economy but cannot be substituted. The idea is to adjust the use and flow of a resource in an economy such that losses are minimized and the recycling is maximized. Several world regions started programs to work towards this goal, which would lead to sustainable use of the limited resources on the planet. On this slide, you see the phosphorus economy. It is far from being a circular economy due to the large losses and waste. Phosphorus-rich rocks like apatite are mined and chemically and physically processed to produce mineral fertilizer, which is then used to produce food in the food production circle. Only a very small fraction of the phosphorus which enters the food production circle re-enters the circle, as most of it either lost on the agricultural fields or agricultures, or as human waste or food waste. However, the losses from the food circle are small compared to the losses which happen during the production of mineral fertilizer. To illustrate this, I want to show you a picture of a phosphate mine. Here you can see a large white mountain which is composed of the major form of waste produced during the production of mineral fertilizer, phosphogypsum. About 40% of the mined phosphorus rocks ends up as phosphogypsum, which is slightly radioactive and keeps piling up in mines around the globe. These growing mountains not only illustrate how inefficiently phosphorus is being used, but also represent major threats to the environment. This became once again visible in the freshwater disaster happening in Florida in spring 2021, in which a pond on a mine, which was held by walls of phosphogypsum, started to leak water into the surrounding area. Despite the large waste problem of the mining sector, most current policies focus on reducing losses from the food production cycle. For example, the European Union aims at reducing nutrient losses by 50%, while only aims at a reduction in fertilizer use of 20%. In addition, national policies are being put in place to enhance the recycling of phosphorus from human waste. In the following, I want to focus on an alternative source of phosphorus for fertilizer production, which avoids the problems associated with conventional fertilizer production from apatites. This source of phosphorus is basalt, which is widely available in amounts inexhaustible on human timescales by current mining capacities. This is in stark contrast to apatite, which reserves are running low and are located in a few countries. Therefore, basalt is much more accessible and affordable than apatite. Basalt contains phosphorus and other rock-derived nutrients and has a high weatherability. When it is crushed and grinded to a fine material, the weathering and the associated release of nutrients from basalt can be vastly enhanced. Other than conventional fertilizer, which is readily available for plant uptake, phosphorus from basalt becomes gradually available as the grains dissolve when added to the soil. On the one hand, this is an advantage, as the phosphorus is less prone to be lost due to leaching. On the other hand, this might require large amounts of basalt dust to be added to the soil to supply enough nutrients to meet the requirements of crops. Currently, basalt dust, which are finely ground basalt particles, are used in a procedure called soil liming, which is done to neutralize acidic soil conditions which are unfavorable for plant growth. These conditions either occur natural or are the result of intensive use of synthetic nitrogen fertilizers. However, the use of basalt as a fertilizer substitute has not been considered yet. In a first exploratory study, we have investigated if basalt dust can supply sufficient amounts of nutrients to compensate for losses associated with the removal of biomass. Biomass is rich in nutrients, and a high-frequency harvest can lead to declining soil fertility if losses are not counteracted by adding additional nutrients to the system. On the right-hand side, you see an estimate of how much phosphorus is removed in a switchgrass plantation annually due to the harvest of biomass in light gray. In dark gray, you see the amount of phosphorus which can be supplied by basalt dust as a function of the amount of basalt dust added. You see that yearly additions of a few kilograms of basalt per square meter are sufficient to replenish nutrient losses due to harvest. Such application rates can be achieved by conventional agricultural equipment if modified. Thus, this study shows that basalt dust can be used as a substitute for conventional fertilizers in a range of systems, here at the example of switchgrass. Basalt not only shows potential as fertilizer for food and fiber production, but also can help to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. Besides nutrients, basalt also contains silicates, which when weather remove CO2 from the atmosphere. The natural reaction of silicate with atmospheric CO2 produces bicarbonate ions, which are ultimately transported to the ocean by river networks and there are deposited and sequestrated as calcium carbonates. These are stored in the ocean for thousands of years. This reaction occurs at a very slow rate naturally and is thought to stabilize the temperatures on Earth on geological timescales. This reaction is also referred to as the Earth's thermostat. By grinding silicates to fine material, the specific surface area is increased, which leads to an order of magnitude higher weathering rates than naturally occur. This is a negative emission technology called enhanced weathering, and it's a co-benefit of basalt dust. For the application of enhanced weathering in croplands, the potentially achievable carbon dioxide removal rates were quantified from major economies. This was done taking into account constraints on the cropland area, as well as on the infrastructure which is needed to produce and transport basalt dust within a country. Accounted for were also greenhouse gas emissions along the supply chains, which are in particular important as the production of basalt dust requires large amounts of energy for the grinding of the material. In countries where the energy demand for the production of basalt dust can be supplied by technologies with a small CO2 footprint, enhanced weathering could provide a substantial share of the nationally agreed greenhouse gas emission reductions as defined in the Paris Agreement. In the case of France, with a strong nuclear power sector, up to 40% of the reductions in greenhouse gas emissions can be achieved solely by the enhanced weathering technology if applied to all cropland in France. In my current work for the Sealand Convergence Institute, I am addressing this knowledge gap by exploring the use of basalt dust as a measure for sustainable food and fiber production and greenhouse gas removal. Due to the dual benefits for food production and climate mitigation, it helps to avoid further pressure on the limited land area available. The large-scale application of basalt in remote forest ecosystems is a central focus of my work, which has just started.